reconvene the Ways and Means Committee, and we just by way of an announcement as we get started here, we'll have Representative Marquart's bill up first. We'll have to adjourn about 5 minutes before the hour so that members can get online for the House session, and then we'll reconvene after the session, complete whatever remains on the agenda. So with that, we do have a quorum present. Representative Olson, would you care to move the minutes?
Mr. Chair, I move the adoption of the minutes from May 13th, 2020.
Okay, that motion is before us. Any discussion? Seeing none, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Representative Marquart, would you care to move your bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I would like to move House File 4673, be recommended to be placed on.
Okay, that motion is before us, and Representative Marquart, you do have an amendment before us.
Very good, Mr. Chair and members. I'd like to move the A1 amendment.
Representative Marquart.
And what that does is basically clarifies that.
Okay, Representative Marquart, you're phasing it for some reason, but at least with me. So Representative Marquart has moved the A1 amendment. Representative Marquart, could you explain the amendment?
That sounds good. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Is that coming? Okay.
Yes.
Very good.
Representative Marquart is frozen.
Can you?
I think it's on your end, Mr. Chair. I can see him, man.
Okay, yeah, it looks like I can see, it looks like, okay, so I'm going to go ahead. The A1 amendment basically clarifies that cities and townships under 500 can apply to the counties for any COVID-19 related expenses, and then removes some language that is not needed. So I'd ask for members' approval on that. To get the bill in the correct shape I'd like to have it in.
Representative Olson, you may need to entertain that motion.
I'm seeing that. Representative Carlson, you're frozen, so we'll move forward with the A1 amendment. So discussion to the A1 amendment. Okay, seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the A1 amendment, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. All right, hearing no, the motion prevails and the A1 amendment.
Very good. Well, thank you, members. So House File.
Representative Marquart, to your bill as amended.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members. So House File 4673 as amended will help, our counties, cities, and townships cover these huge costs of providing the necessary services due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so this bill would provide the funding for the services provided by our local heroes, those people on the front line. So that's our police officers, our firefighters, our first responders, our nurses, everyone who basically literally are out trying to save lives in our communities. Another aspect of the bill, it guarantees economic support for businesses, individuals, and families who are getting hit pretty hard during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so let me give you a little background before I go any further and explain my bill, kind of where we're at with this. So I first also want to say I appreciate the input by Representative Garofalo and Representative Carlson A. I'm not saying they support this, but their input is in the bill. So thank you for that. So under the CARES Act, which was passed on March 27th of 2020, in that was a coronavirus relief fund. And in that, $150 billion was set aside for states, tribal governments, and units of local government that exceeded 500,000 in population. And so Minnesota received about $2.2 billion from this relief fund. And in the law also said 45% had to go out to local government. So that's about $984 million. Now, specifically in the law, it stated that you would get direct payments if you were a unit of local government that exceeded 500,000 population. Only two entities in Minnesota qualify for that, and that is the county of Hennepin and the county of Ramsey. And so they received a specifically directed by law appropriation of $317 million from the U.S. Department of Treasury. And so House File 4673 deals with setting up a system to distribute the $667 million to the other units of government. So there's going to be 85 counties, 853 cities, and 1,782 townships. And so what are some of the requirements of this bill? I know some of you are familiar with it, but many might not be. So there's three primary requirements in law that local units of government in the state has to follow. Number one, it has to be necessary expenditures due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So it has to be expenditures relating to COVID-19. Number two is that it cannot be kind of replacing funds that are already accounted for in the last budget passed by the state. So that would be our budget that we passed in special session last year. And then the third criteria, it has to be expenses that were incurred between March 1st of 2020 to December 30th of this year. And so the key is kind of the expenditures must be necessary. And the Department of Treasury has set out some guidance on this. And basically, the expenditure has to be reasonably necessary for its intended use in the reasonable judgment of the government agency expending the funds. So reasonably necessary in the reasonable judgment of those distributing the funds. So also from the Department of Treasury guidance, what are some of the uses that the funds can be used for? And this is not all inclusive, but it can deal with medical expenses, hospitals, clinics, testing, contact tracing, public health, COVID-19 related payroll expenses. So that would be for public safety, public health, healthcare, human services, expenses to facilitate compliance with COVID-19 related measures. So it could be food delivery to senior citizens, technological improvements, telework for public employees, maintaining county jails, economic support for businesses and individuals, kind of some other areas that would probably qualify, workers' compensation. One thing that was in the guidance specifically on questions that were asked, facilitate livestock depopulation incurred by producers due to the food supply chain disruptions. So that certainly is very relevant. Could prevent eviction and assist in preventing homelessness, employment and training programs necessary for people who lost jobs through COVID-19. And as I mentioned, also assist businesses with the cost of business interruptions, or if they close voluntarily, or just a decrease in customers, that would be proper funding for economic support. So that's not all inclusive, but to give you an idea of some of the allowable expenses according to the Department of Treasury guidance. Some of the things it cannot be used for specifically. And the thing to remember here is that this is not a general purpose aid. This is not local government aid. This is not county program aid. It's not a general purpose aid. This can only go to necessary COVID-19 expenses. And so, I know that I think in a couple years, this program we can expect will be audited. And when that audit comes out, I really want to see a clean bill of health. And so I just think for everyone, that's important to remember that it's for COVID-19 expenses. So you cannot replace revenue lost for local units of government. So basically, property tax relief is not allowed. You cannot provide payroll to employees whose work duties are not substantial to COVID-19, and you can't do severance pay or damage covered by insurance or something that's already covered by a federal program that you receive money on. So that's kind of some guidelines. So what does House File 4673 as amended do? So primarily three main goals, I think. Number one is to get the dollars out quickly to cities to respond to this pandemic emergency. So we know cities and counties and townships have incurred a lot of costs. The key is to get this out early. This was one of the recommendations by Representative Garofalo. And so in the bill, we have it going out June 15th of 2020, this first round. A second point is there's two rounds. Of the $667 million, it's kind of split 85% in the first round, 15% in a second round of grants. So that'd be $567 million that would go out in the first round. And then $100 million would be reserved for grants that units of governments could apply for from August 1st through December 1st. And I think this is really important. And, you know, I don't know if $100 million is the right amount. We've had folks say it should be more. But I think it's important to have something there to give the state flexibility to be able to respond quickly, if we can, to unexpected costs that might come up, dealing with new outbreaks or hotspots and extra expenses. So we think that's important to kind of leave some later on in a second round. And I guess the kind of a third main point is that this bill does guarantee, it sets aside dollars for economic support for businesses and also for individuals and families. So there would be a set amount set aside. So how does the formula work? And then I will complete here. So $567 million is going to go out on this formula. That's 85% of the $667 million. 45% go out to the counties, other than Hennepin and Ramsey, at per capita basis, 45%. 45% of the funds would go out to the cities on a per capita basis, and that would be cities and townships with populations of 500 or more. And so basically it's about $255 million to the counties, $255 million to the cities. Then there is 10% set aside for the economic support and emergency financial assistance for businesses, individuals, and families. And that'd be about $57 million. That would go to the counties. And so if you look at the county total funds, it's about $312 million, but they would be responsible to spend up to 18% of the money they're allocated, which would be that $57 million, on designing whatever kind of system or plan they wanted to assist businesses, individuals, and families. I think that's really important that we provide that economic support, that there's a guarantee, because we know not only are there huge expenses in this fight for our local units of government, but there's huge expenses economically. And that's just as important to fighting our COVID response. And so for cities and townships under 500 population, they would not get the initial distribution, because we know that a lot of those small cities and townships, which might be many of them under 100 population, they may have no expense at all. And this would save them a lot of administration, where if they automatically get the money, they have to figure it out and then they have to send it back. Where if you don't have any COVID-19 related expenses, you don't have any administration to have to worry about. And a lot of these small cities and townships, have part-time staff doing these type of things. But if, in fact, any of those communities under 500 have a COVID-19 related expense, they go to the county and they can apply, and it will cover any and all expenses that they have. So they are guaranteed that. And so we take it through the county where they don't have to go through the state. Just a couple other things then. So what is not spent by October 1st would go back to the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And then, of course, there's these grants on the last $100 million that the Department of Revenue, with the Department of Employment, Economic Development, Department of Health would look at setting up grants. And so, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, that is the bill 4673 as amended.
Thank you, Representative Marquart. So we have a couple of questions in the queue, and just a reminder that we have session at 10, so we'll be wrapping up by 9:55. And if we don't get to a vote, we will do that when we come back after session adjourns. So with that, we'll go to Representative Hertaus.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chair Marquart, for bringing this forward. I agree with you that it's important to get the money out right away for it to be effective and used for the purposes in which it was intended and to minimize mischief. You and I have worked in the past on LGA, and I'm familiar with the large number of rural communities and the different classes of cities and the population. And I was just wondering if you had a rough idea or an approximation of what the per capita dollar amount distribution would be for those cities over 500, and not an exact number, but just an approximate idea.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Representative Hertaus. It comes out right now on the first distribution to about $51.50 per capita for each city over 500. And then townships are at $25 per capita.
Representative Hertaus.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and that answered my question. We can move on to the next one.
Thank you. Representative Long.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I saw that Commissioner Bowerly was on the call. I just had one quick question for her, if that's all right.
Sure. Go ahead, Representative Long.
Thank you. Chair Marquart, I appreciate you not including the Senate component that would take the Hennepin County and Ramsey County shares and give those to cities in those counties, which is a really unfair way of approaching this. But my question for Commissioner Bowerly is that those allocations came straight from the federal government. And it strikes me as potentially not something the state could even do to reallocate those amounts, since those were direct federal appropriations. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Commissioner Bowerly.
Chair Olson and Representative Long, I haven't thoroughly studied the legal issue, but I am unaware of the state's ability to intercept or interfere with a federal appropriation.
Thank you.
Representative Long.
Just one more question for Chair Marquart. I certainly share your concerns for the small townships and small cities being able to track and process federal dollars, and I think having those go through the county makes some sense. It strikes me that might apply to cities that are eligible under the bill right now, cities in the 500 range, and I'm curious why we chose 500 as a cutoff. It feels like some of those small cities may face the same challenges of tracking federal dollars that they may not be used to and having to disperse those.
So,
Representative
Madam Chair and Representative Long, I'm going to tell you there's no magic to the 500. I was kind of looking in my area where I have 30 townships in Clay County, and only 2 of them are 500 population or more, and I've got a lot of cities. And so I just thought it could be another number, but I just thought that might work, where they would have kind of more full-time administrative services to not get overburdened with administration. So in short, there's no magic to the number, certainly.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative, okay. Representative Bernardi, we'll do you as the last question here before we wrap for recess. Representative Bernardi. I think she may need to be unmuted.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Thank you for thank you for unmuting me. I appreciate it. I have a question. So when this COVID-19 first happened, local governmental units were addressing it right away before the CARES Act came out. And my question for you is, are those the funds that they spent before the CARES Act was enacted? Will those be covered as well?
Representative Marquart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Bernardi, my understanding is, according to what is right in the federal law, is costs incurred from March 1st to December 30th. So I think they could go back to March 1st.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Bernardi. Okay.
No,
I
thank you.
Okay, thank you, Representative. I still have Representative Vogel and Representative Garofalo. Representative Vogel, do you think we could do your question in 3 minutes, or would you prefer to wait until after the recess?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think it'll take long at all.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Marquart, for bringing this forward. One question is, in the appropriation session, it says that if the money isn't there, it will be reallocated on a different proportional basis. Is there any chance that the money could be short, that it would have been appropriated and spent, and then we'd have to go back to the general fund? Or is there a mechanism in place to ensure that there would never be more going out than could had already come in?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Representative Vogel. I mean, the limit is a total of $667 million in this bill. So no more than that can be spent. Now, money that is not spent by local units of government by October 1st will cancel back to the overall coronavirus relief fund, which isn't the 667, but actually back to the 2.2 billion. So I don't know if I answered your question for sure on that.
Representative Vogel.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify that if there had to be a reallocation, that we wouldn't have to claw back. In other words, no more money would ever be sent out than what we had access to.
Madam Chair and Representative Vogel, that's correct. There wouldn't be. Now, there's still, if somehow through an audit or something, they found out that money had not been spent correctly or so forth, there is some procedures to claw back, if you will. It's kind of through a levy that they can recapture some of those dollars.
Anything further, Representative Vogel? Okay, Representative Garofalo, we have you on the list too. I don't know if there's a closing comments, questions. If you did want to, we could maybe get this vote in if folks are willing to go close to 10. If we can see, I don't know, Representative Garofalo, how long you're imagining you might take here.
Madam Chair, I'll suggest that we just leave recess. One of the things is the Republicans in the committee, we haven't caucused this bill yet. And so I may suggest that at the completion of the House session, if you could just give us 10 or 15 minutes to kind of meet separately for a little bit. I'm supporting Chairman Marquart's bill. I'll be voting for it. But I think it's important that there be consensus on this bill as it's going forward. And I just want to make sure that members of my caucus have a full understanding of the bill without being negative. There are some fault lines in this bill, Chairman Marquart, and there's no need to, we don't need to do that right now. But just, again, I think it's very important that the House, this is one of these issues where as a legislature and as a House of Representatives, I think a strong consensus on this bill is important. And I just want to make sure that I am able to address any concerns that my side of the aisle has on it before we would come back and take a vote on it. So that would be my request if the majority can allow this after the floor session. Thank you.
Representative Garofalo, yes, I think that makes good sense. And given how the timing is working out today with session and the interruption, I think that makes good sense. So what we'll plan to do is recess now. So we will come back after, session adjourns. So not the recess, but after session actually adjourns this afternoon, we'll come back to Ways and Means, and we'll do it 15 minutes after to give the Republicans enough chance to caucus before we come back, if that's agreeable to everyone.
Yeah.
And with that, we will go in. Representative Garofalo, did you have your hand up to that? Or it's still up from later,
No.
earlier?
No, sorry. Sorry about that.
Nope, that's all right. All right, great. So with that, we are in recess, and we will see everyone back 15 minutes after session adjourns.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.